it all really comes down to utility. The reality is you need something that keeps the elements at bay. I put my clothing to the test of nature. It's not so much about the aesthetic for me when I'm at home, it's about how tough it is.
Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette. We're here in London today at Walker Slater, and I'm here with Ash from the Chaps Guide. Hello, Ash.
Hello, Raphael. Nice to be here.
Thank you for coming. So, Ash lives in the English countryside, and we thought it would be a good idea to talk about what a real Englishman in the country actually wears versus what maybe the old money trend tries to make you believe.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, certainly it all really comes down to utility. You know, you can sort of dress it up with fancy clothing, but the reality is you need something that keeps the elements at bay. So for me, a good pair of neoprene-lined rubber boots, Wellington boots. I mean, that's where I tend to live in from sort of October to February in the UK, because it's wet and it's cold.
There's also a French brand, I think. They have like one lined with curly lamb, I think, or wool. Is that something you'd ever consider?
Well, I would. Depends on the price point, you know, because they do tend to have a limited lifespan, because the rubber does. I mean, I think the last pair I owned was by Ariat, American equestrian brand, and they lasted 4 years. So they do take quite a bashing. So you don't want to put too much money into your rubber boots because they're not something that can be repaired easily. So, you know, it's a short-term purchase.
Interesting. All right. So, you know, when you think of the English countryside, I always think of like maybe an old school Defender. And I could picture you driving that. But what are you actually driving?
Well, I mean, I'm very unglamorous. I drive Practicality. So I've got a Volkswagen Golf.
Really?
It gets me from A to B and it never breaks down. I think I've owned Golfs for over 25 years and I have never had a breakdown.
So which one did you start with? Because, you know, first generation, second generation, third?
Oh God, now you're asking. I'm not a car guy. So, I mean, they all look roughly the same. I couldn't tell you anything about them at all.
You just like the size and the format.
Yeah.
And its practicality.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, my wife did own a, what was it, a Land Rover Discovery, whatever it was called. I mean, not even that good with cars. I found them somewhat heavy and challenging to drive because all of that engineering, the four-wheel drive, you know, because you spend most of your time on the road with them, not actually ploughing through the fields. They're sort of over-engineered for daily driving, I find.
Interesting. All right. So how often would you say you actually wear your rain boots?
Rain boots, I would say certainly on a daily basis because I spend a lot of time outdoors. My wife rides, so got a couple of horses which live in the fields behind our home. So she's back and forth there every day, checking on them, that sort of thing. I'm often up there as well. I do all of the filming from my channel in the outdoors. So although I might look rather serene above the waist when people see me on a video, actually it's rubber boots below which you can't see.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So does she wear like, you know, the famous like hunting pink? Or is that all just
no, I mean,
a romantic idea?
A little bit romantic, you know. We don't do any hunting as such. It's just riding for fun. I mean, I don't ride, to be honest. Those big beasties are beyond my comfort level. But moving up the body, so the rubber boots, I mean, I do find corduroy trousers is the place to go in the winter months because of the warmth and the practicality.
And they're just comfortable, right? You wear them.
They're comfortable. They're like an old pair of pajamas when eventually they get fully broken in.
And you know, the ironing is interesting too. How do you iron them?
Flat. I never try and iron a crease in a pair of corduroys. I iron them flat, seam to seam.
Because it doesn't stay in any ways.
And you can't tell because of the linear stripes.
Do you iron them from the back or from the corded side?
Turn them inside out. Yes. Iron them from the inside out.
Interesting.
That's my plan. What do you? I know you like your corduroys. Do you do the same?
You know, frankly, I don't iron them, but yes, they're ironed on the back, and I like heavier corduroys. And I've looked into them. You know, there's thinner weights, there's medium weights, and they're real heavy weights. So when I designed our Stancliffe corduroys, I wanted to go with the heaviest fabric I could find. But I was like, you know, let's try the others. So I tried all the others up and down the range, and to my surprise, the heaviest corduroys we had were stiffer. They were almost, every step I took, I felt they were there. Did you ever have that experience?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a break-in period, I think, with corduroy, if you've got good corduroy, because it takes a while to get that softness. They've got to, go through the wash a few times. They've got to have a bit of a life before they feel like yours, I think.
And I definitely did that. We washed them heavily because we wanted to basically replicate, long-term wear. So we just used them hard. And they're still like on the stiffer side. Now, then we went down in weight and finishing, and that seemed to be like the perfect spot. They're soft, when the light hits them, you get that nice effect. And then there was also, of course, all the different wales. Because initially, you go to a department store, they typically have someone, maybe an 8 wale or something like that. And then I thought, well, maybe it would be cool to have like 3 wale, 4 wale, right? Like really bold ones, or the super fine ones, the 12 to 13. What's your take? What do you like?
I prefer thick. I like the big thick wales because, if you're going to go corduroy, don't messing around. I want the full Monty.
Okay, nice. I wanted to go for something that was bigger than the average corduroy, but I didn't want to go so big that people were like, wow, what is this? So when you choose your corduroys, what kind of style do you like? Do you like them trim fitting? Do you like them low on your waist? Do you like them higher? Do you like them, pleated or always flat front? What do you want, pockets? Like what are you looking for?
I mean, for me, it's a utility item. So it's something I'm wearing predominantly to keep warm. I want it to be long wearing as well. So I want something that's going to last a long time. So I like, as you say, nice thick wales, nice deep pockets, because I put my clothing to the test of nature. So it's not so much about the aesthetic for me when I'm at home. It's about how tough it is, because I want a pair of trousers to last a few years. And that's why I like corduroy, because it is quite a hard-wearing material.
Especially when it's woven very densely with a lot of warp threads. I've always had big thighs, and so when I, walk with less expensive corduroys, they wear out pretty quickly in the crotch area. I don't know if you've experienced that.
I think that's a common thing. It's the way the male of the human species is made. We just don't have that gap, do we? Unlike the females. So, yeah, that's one of the downsides to corduroy. I think it's the friction point is kind of its bête noire.
What colors do you go for?
I actually like quite bold colours. So I like my pinks, my sort of ochre, yellows, things like that, because you can get away with it with corduroy. Nobody's expecting it to be a sombre, conservative colour. That's always been the tradition here in the UK. It's go for the colours.
So what do you wear in the summer?
Summer months, I tend to wear chinos. So controversially perhaps, when I hit 40, a few years ago now, I'm 54, I stopped wearing denim trousers. I thought I'd got to a point where it was time to dress like a man instead of a boy.
Yeah.
And I left the denims behind, and I kind of wear chinos as my day-to-day trousers now for comfort and also for style, because I think the chino is something, this morning I might be wearing a sports jacket, this afternoon I could just dress it down with a shirt, whatever you need to do. I think the chino's got you covered. So for me, chino most of the time.
It's interesting because I feel very similarly to you. I don't wear denim, not because I'm like a denim hater. It more came from a point of view, I always had fit issues. And then I realized, I really liked high-rise pants. And finding high-rise jeans is close to impossible unless you go bespoke. And I didn't feel I wanted it because I didn't like it that much in the first place. So yeah, I can relate to that.
And the obscenity of the modern style world is that you will pay more for a pair of denim trousers than you would for a beautiful pair of, grey flannel slacks. And I just can't subscribe to an ideology where I would pay a couple of £100 for a pair of jeans, which are in essence work trousers to me, when I could buy a beautiful pair of tailored flannel slacks, which are ultimately much more wearable, comfortable, and smart.
Yeah, and I think that whole workwear style. It's more stylish now. I'm from Minnesota, home of the Red Wing boot. And they have this whole heritage line, which is super popular in Germany and in Japan, and I'm sure in the UK too. But it's an original work boot. People now probably wear it more not working than otherwise. So for your chinos, what do you like there? Lightweight,
Kind
medium
of mid.
weight.
Yeah, kind of mid. I am not precious about the way I dress myself, all right? So I like to have a certain aesthetic, but I'm not going to get anal about, certain elements. So I will just look for a good mid-price, because I know chinos are not going to last for long. You're not investing in a long-term wardrobe item.
How long do they last?
Probably about 2 or 3 years, I mean, I'm coming to a point now where I realize I can't just keep buying things, as one often does. The modern world encourages us to buy. And before you know it, that wardrobe is bursting at the edges. So I'm going through a phase where I'm trying to actually wear everything that I own to the point of failure, rather than just keep buying, and I'll have 10 or 15 pairs of trousers, which I wear once every 6 months. There's no value for money in that. So for me, it's very much focusing on what I buy is something which I'm going to wear.
And where do your chinos wear out?
For me, it's normally the knees. Spend a lot of time sort of, on my knees. But yeah, that tends to be the failure point for me.
Interesting. Okay. So then going further up.
So moving up the body, as we are entering autumn, winter time. So for me, it would be natural fabrics against the body. So I tend to like sort of flannel shirts. I tend to use a British tailoring house called Brogues, which sort of fairly mid-price point. They make good quality products, but they're not too crushingly expensive. So they make a nice flannel shirt. So for me, nice cotton against the skin, keeps me warm, keeps me feeling happy in the winter. And then over that,
do you have any checked patterns on it?
Oh yeah,
or
yeah,
solids?
all checked. The country is all about check here in the UK, and I like my wools. So I love natural wool against the body. I'll often wear a Submariner style sweater. So if I'm not wearing a shirt, I'll be wearing a t-shirt, but a Submariner style sweater. Nice big thick sweater. I like really natural wool, so you've still got the lanolin on there, so you can almost smell the nature. And you get that sort of feeling on your hands after you've put it on.
So you want to feel it on your skin. So there's no undershirt?
I normally wear a t-shirt just for the sake of extending the hygienic period of the wool, obviously.
Because typically, I've always found, if you have wool directly on your skin, it can be itchy. Cashmere can be nicer, but it's kind of an odd feeling in my mind. Okay. So you have a t-shirt, just regular t-shirt?
Just a cotton t-shirt, yeah. And then a nice big thick woolly sweater. And I think there is nothing more cosseting in the winter months than having a nice big Submariner sweater. You can take on the world. And in fact, many people have. The garments which men wore in the golden era of polar exploration. Your Ernest Shackletons and Captain Scotts. It was a thick woolly Submariner sweater.
So do you go for an Irish fisherman sweater, or maybe a more like Donegal yarn, like a speckled sweater, or what?
Well, I actually use a brand called Arthur Beale. So they make this Beerenberg big, thick, woolly sweater, and oh my God, it's such a pleasant. It's like sinking into a warm sleeping bag when you've got that on. It's a great time. Although, to be honest, the way the climate is moving, you don't get that much use out of that here these days. The UK, our winters, and I live in rather the south of the country as well. We don't really get sub-zero that often here. We have a Mediterranean climate in the UK almost.
So, and color-wise, is there patterns in your sweaters that are solids?
I like natural colors, actually. Depending on where you, I think the brands which I use, they tend to keep the color natural to the sheep. So the donor animal will determine the color of the garment, which again, I think is a beautiful touch. You have true nature, and you can have the sort of dark browns and the lighter sort of ecru colors, which I think are very fetching. And then over that, what else? Barber. A country gentleman has to wear Barber. Good enough for the king, it's good enough for me.
Interesting. And then hat wear.
I tend to wear a flat cap. So yeah, it's kind of the gentleman's hat of choice. I mean, I do actually own a bowler hat, but I've yet to find a good purpose for it.
Okay. I only saw one gentleman here in London wearing a bowler hat the other day. But so for the barber, there's of course, the Beaufort wax jacket, but there's also like the quilted jackets, which I find are quite nice for like transitional periods because they're lightweight, they're warm, you can just bring them with. They're quite nice. Do you go with Barber or do you go with other brands?
Well, I tend to wear Barber as my outer shell. I do have a few of the Schoffel gillets, which are a nice marry-up with the Barber. And when you have those on, I mean, you know, no temperatures are going to hold you back, so you're ready for anything.
Do you ever dress up like in a tweed sport coat or like, +4s or anything of that kind?
I don't own a pair of +4s, I have to admit. But for me, I mean, I do wear tweed quite a lot because it is the ideal material, really, for country life. It is warm, it's wool. It's quite resistant to the elements as well as, when I say the elements, I mean the environment. So I often find myself walking in and out of a little woodland. I have a little hut in the woods, which I go to for solitude and introspection, and I often have to push my way through the sort of undergrowth. Mm-hmm. And tweed is one of the more resilient materials,
like
which I have
found. Tweed.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite tough. People really don't think that. It can resist the odd thorn here and there, and from that point of view, I think it's a great choice for the active person.
So when you're up for a tweed jacket, I've often found the older ones had like the center vent, right? And they were typically, flat pockets, 2 or 3 buttons, notched lapel. Lately, I've seen more, side vents on tweed jackets. And I personally like more details, right? Maybe a half belt or, bellows pockets, that kind of stuff. So stuff actually fits in. Well, what's your take?
Well, again, to be honest, it's utility, right? That's my principal consideration. So I think what you're talking about there is that many tweed jackets, where they used to be mostly a utility garment, now they're straying into the world of more dress. That's why I think you're seeing the vented, things up the back, and various other things. What I like to do, now if you go to sort of Portobello Road here in London, you'll find on sort of the clothing days that
we went there.
Yeah. Oh, you've been there, have you?
Yeah.
You've seen the vendors who are selling sort of the tweed speciality stuff, and you can find yourself looking at tweed garments from the 50s and the 60s, and then there's a whole different world of the quality there between the stuff you get today. I mean, anything which for a start has existed for 60 years and is still good enough to be resold tells you a lot about the quality, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, there's, the most famous one, of course, is Harris Tweed. But there are other mills. There's the Lovett Mill that produces really beautiful tweeds. There's other companies, Marling and Evans, that come up with cool creations. Abraham Moon. Do you have a favorite?
Abraham Moon is one which is probably the most well known, but Harris being, the sort of watchword of excellence, I would imagine. But I think there's a certain romanticism to Harris Tweed as well, about its place of origin and the donor animals and all that sort of thing. So I think that's what spins the myth around Harris, and why I think it's always retained its sort of premier status in the world of tweed.
So do you ever wear, like heavy overcoats?
I do. My father, one of my favourite memories of my dad, he's 93, still very much with us, but I remember as a kid, he dressed in the traditional style. And I remember trying on his overcoat when I was a little kid and feeling that weight and the comforting feeling of a big, thick overcoat. And I think it's quite tragic these days that if you try on a modern day overcoat, there's so little weight to them. The sort of woolen count is so reduced in modern times.
I'm 100% with you, and I'm a big fan of quite an old overcoat collection. I think that's one thing I truly want to make is making an overcoat for Fort Belvedere from a really heavy fabric, like 1,000 grams, 1,200. But it's actually quite hard to make. That's probably why because the modern sheep, they don't have the same fibers anymore. They're much finer these days than the coarse ones that they used to have. But it's almost like a weighted blanket, right? You feel like you're back in the womb again.
Oh, totally. I mean, if you think where the overcoat originated, the greatcoat, you know, when soldiers wore them and it was brutally cold. And I remember having a greatcoat when I was in military service myself, and it was like pulling on that warm blanket, and you know, it makes you feel so comfortable. It's hard to find them these days. I've got a few vintage overcoats. I've got an original Crombie by Crombie.
With the Crombie felt.
Yeah, purchased from eBay.
What color?
It's a grey, £100, very, very wearable. You know, it was a £1,000 plus coat back in its sort of day. Of course, tragically, Crombie no longer with us, so only sort of vintage pieces you can track down these days. But oh yeah, I love wearing that coat. I look forward to the coldest part of winter, so I can pull those overcoats out and just stride forward into the elements with confidence.
Well, as a man with military heritage, I'm curious, do you go for double-breasted or single-breasted silhouettes?
Well, I've only got a double-breasted, but if the choice be mine, I think I would have gone double, because I think there is a certain presence about the double-breasted. I have images of, you know, Winston Churchill and people like that with their thick overcoats on, you know, the bowler hat with the old the symbol.
Yep. Personally, I also really like the double-breasted silhouette because it's very nice. And you know, while here in London, we walked around different stores and we saw, you know, the polo coat from Polo Ralph Lauren, and I was quite impressed that they actually, you know, made it from 100% camel hair and made in the US. You know, that was cool to see, and it's a staple that they always have at the Ralph Lauren boutique. But it was, you know, I think £2,500 or something like that, maybe 2,200. But it was expensive. And then we also stopped by at like Cordings to check what they had, and Jack put on a coat. It was also a polo coat, and it had a very nice style. It wasn't camel hair, I think, but it looked very nice. For my taste, of course, it's not quite a weight I'm looking for, but it's better than many other overcoats that are super lightweight. That being said, though, if you live in a climate where it doesn't get super hot, that's exactly what you want. You want a lighter overcoat.
Yeah.
But you don't get the drape, do you?
No, and it saddens me really that the overcoat seems to be declining, because of course folks these days, they want the mobility. They're going for performance fabrics over the natural fabrics. At the best, you'll see folks wearing a pea coat perhaps, which is kind of a little short. I like my overcoats to go beyond the knee.
Yeah.
So I really feel I'm sort of in a tent as I'm walking down the road.
But you're not going for like the ankle length, a la
No, not
Hercule
quite that far.
Poirot kind of, that's too much, right?
No, just below the knees enough for me.
Okay, nice. Any other kind of garments that you wear, like field jackets maybe, or?
I mean, I am a big fan of the utility jacket, and I've noticed, I mean, yesterday I walked down Savile Row, and in the windows of all the top tailors these days, they've all sort of heralding chore jackets, utility jackets, whatever you want to call them, but these practical garments which are sort of waist length, lots of pockets, very comfortable, but very usable as well.
Everyone who follows your channel should be well aware that you are a watch admirer and you're not afraid to buy some expensive watches. Tell us more about that and how that fits into that country gentleman vibe.
Okay, that's interesting. So my sort of watch journey, like most people, I'm a product of my, you know, upbringing. And for me, the 80s and 90s, when I was coming into my young adult era, and Miami Vice, a quite sort of influential television series for many, many people, not just for the colours and the styles and things like that, because at that time the world was still rather conservative. People dressed for work, everybody wore suits, and that took us into a new era of the colour aesthetic being much more prevalent. And for me, Sonny Crockett, obviously the lead character, was a Rolex wearer. I know he wore other watches as well. And I do recall in that era that men, mostly men, the sort of, because we didn't wear jewellery terribly, men, so the only pseudo piece of jewellery which most chaps would wear would be a wristwatch.
Cufflinks maybe.
Bit of cufflinks as well.
Maybe a pinky ring.
Yeah, if that's your thing. But for me, the wristwatch was always the only item which I would be likely to have. I'm married, but I don't wear a ring, so for me the wristwatch is my pseudo bit of jewellery that I can wear to demonstrate my character and my personality. So being influenced as I was by Miami Vice and, you know, the Rolex watch, the Rolex Datejust. when I came to a point of financial stability, when I was ready to make a considered investment in a luxury item, I was walking down the street in a town called Taunton. It was my father's 88th birthday. And I was walking down the street with my father and my 8-year-old son at the time. And I looked in the window of this jewellery store, and sure enough, there was the exact watch that I'd always wanted. It was a steel Datejust with a blue dial, with a Jubilee bracelet. And I thought, this is fate. I'm here, 3 generations of the family. I was in the position and the mental state to be ready to spend that sort of money on a watch. And I bought it there and then. And we were all sat in a row, father, me, and son. And I thought, this watch will pass down the generation. This is, the symbology of this watch going on into the future. It remains my favorite watch. It's a watch which I would never sell. And, I think of it maybe in the next generation, when my son will wear that watch, he will think of his old fella and the day that he was there with his grandfather and we all bought it.
I heard you mention the word investment. Do you roughly remember how much you spent for that watch at the time?
Sadly, I do. It was £6,150, which was a really considered investment. But then, I think I was about 48 years of age at this time, and I was in control of my finances. I've controlled my vices throughout life. And I know folks will say, that's ridiculous. You will buy second-hand clothes. I often buy pre-owned clothing. How could you then, in good conscience, spend that sort of money on something as innocuous as a wristwatch? But I would answer that by saying everybody has a thing which they're prepared to spend money on. Some people will spend money on technology. They'll play video games and they'll do things like that. But for me, a wristwatch is something which sort of evokes that sense of passion for me. It's something, that's the thing. I don't spend money on cars. That is my one thing.
So how did you said, you were in the right mental state. How long did it take you to get to that state?
Many, many years. Because when, as an ordinary guy, I've no wealth or anything like that. When you're talking about spending maybe 1-2 months worth of total income into the family, you've got to have got it into your head that you're ready to do that. Because if you're not, I think, when you've bought it, you're going to be afraid to wear it. You have to have the understanding that you're bringing something into your life which is potentially going to outlive you. It can move along down the family, and it takes the memory with it. So I'm not just investing for now. I'm investing hopefully for my son, and who knows, whoever comes after that. So yeah, it's I haven't had it engraved yet. Maybe. Who knows? But it'll never be sold, so I can put, I can engrave it with anything you like. There's no worries about the resale price. But yeah, something about the colour. Blue is my favourite colour. I got a blue car. My beautiful wife, her eyes are blue. So, you choose the things which resonate with you, don't you?
Absolutely. So have you ever looked again how much it would cost if you'd buy it today again?
Well, actually, that particular model, I don't think it's one of the trendy ones. So it's probably roughly the same, which is not too bad, actually, when you think about buying luxury items. There's very few which can retain a flat level of ownership. So if you had to bail out, you've always going to get the return. So that's where it started for me. Unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, considered, because I did go down the Rolex sort of rabbit hole then. I rather liked that experience of being treated well by going into a store and that feeling you get when you buy, that luxury item. So after the Datejust, I thought, okay, where do you go next? And I'm a bit of a James Bond fan, I'll be honest with you. So the Rolex Submariner. Now I'm talking about an era where you could walk into a shop and actually say, I'd like one of those. And the fellow says, yeah, I'll get one for you. 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I waited 4 weeks. And the chap said, yeah, come and get your Submariner. Good watch. My son loves my Submariner, actually. He's coming to the stage now where he's roughly the same. He's actually larger than me, and he's only 14. So when we sort of go on holiday or for special family meals out, I will let him wear the Submariner. So he's staking his claim.
Interesting.
And I like the Submariner, but it is a little chunky because I'm a bit more on the sort of, I'm by no means petite, but it is a larger watch and it doesn't necessarily fit easily under the cuff of a shirt. So after that, I went for the Rolex GMT, GMT Master 2. So when I retired at 50, you know the old classic, you treat yourself to a gold watch. I couldn't afford a gold watch. I went for a two-tone, so half and half. And I went for the model that they call the root beer, which is a lovely sort of earth tones. It's got rose gold and it's got brown on the bezel. And I really do like that watch. It's one of my favorites. But then while I was buying that one, the fellow said, oh, this is a nice one, but you know everybody wants the Pepsi model, don't you? I said, yeah, but of course you can't get one of them. They're sort of highly sought after. I said, well, you know, put my name down for it, and if one ever comes in, let me know. Half joking. So about 2 years later, I get a phone call. Your Pepsi's in, Mr. Jones. Would you like to come and collect it? Now, this was at the peak when that watch was extremely desirable. And I didn't really want the watch, but I thought, you can't look a gift horse in the mouth. When somebody is offering you a GMT Master 2 in the Pepsi configuration at the retail price, when they're trading for twice that on the pre-owned market, you've got to go for it. So yeah, that's where I went next. Added that one. I actually wear it quite a lot, and it's a lovely little watch, actually.
So you mentioned a pre-owned market.
Yeah.
And based on what you've shared so far is that all the watches you lined up or mentioned were new, but you talked about being totally open to buying vintage clothes. So would you be open to buying vintage watches?
I think I would. I think I would. Particularly these days where many watches, they have a set sort of production run. So I know particularly in the Rolex world, there are people who prefer the older model Submariners because they are perhaps more aesthetically pleasing, they're less chunky. If you want to get the sort of ones which were the Bond style ones, they were discontinued many years ago. But if you wanted that style and you were wedded to that vintage look, I would have no problem at all in buying a watch of that nature because, I mean, let's remember that they probably last 100 years if looked after well.
And there's reputable sellers, and I think Rolex is faked, and so you buying used, of course, is a higher risk than if you get it from the authorized dealer.
Yeah.
But you probably also, I mean, with Rolex, who knows, right? You said that the price was twice as high on the used market. But with other watches, there's certainly a price advantage to be had.
Oh, sure.
Even like watches like Cartier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that whole Rolex thing was a short-lived fascination with the brand. I mean, obviously they're huge marketing budget, and they sort of ensconced themselves in the public consciousness as being the physical representation of success. Well, I think that is kind of tapering a bit now. People are becoming much more conscious of quality, but in other more classical areas. I've kind of switched allegiance. I wear a Cartier watch myself now, so you know I've gone from the more chunky to the more classical.
So do you have any? You know, I want the classic tank watch or the Tank Americaine or maybe others that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I do. I love the tank. My wife has a particular enjoyment of the tank. She doesn't own one, but it's certainly probably the next watch which will enter the family, I suspect. But I like the smaller classical pieces. I've gone away from the chunkier wristwatch which you've seen men wearing over the last 10 years or so. And I think the trend is heading more towards the classical look, which is pleasing because if you look at old photographs of, say, Cary Grant, you know, his wristwatch was always very petite, functionally perfect, and I think that's all you need. Why do you need a watch which can plumb the depths of 1,000 feet? Does anybody ever test its parameters?
But I mean, you know, you don't need a watch today to tell time. It's, you know, you could get a quartz version of it. So there must be more for you of why you like that watch other than utility.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, it's the pseudo piece of jewelry that a gentleman has. I mean, when it comes to style, we don't need many. I mean, there is no practical application for a necktie.
Absolutely.
In the modern world. We wear it because it is a physical demonstration of some element of our character. The tie I'm wearing today is the Royal Air Force regimental tie. So I served in the Royal Air Force. If I see another gentleman on the street wearing the same tie, we are brothers. We can open a conversation. So it's not about, you know, we wear it for practicality. It is far more than that, isn't it? And I think the same goes for a wristwatch. It tells you something about the style of the gentleman. If you're a classic person who enjoys the sort of Art Deco lines, as I do with the Cartier, It's very different to, say, a Breitling, which is a big old chunk on your wrist. You're showing the world perhaps you're a brasher gentleman.
Yeah.
No disrespect to that, but we've all got our different tastes.
When I spoke with Jeremy Hackett, he was like, I like the look of watches, but the mechanics, I'm not so interested in that. How's it for you?
I like the idea that there's this little city behind the dial of all of these sort of little cogs and wheels turning in unison. I think it's like 150 parts or something in most typical automatic wristwatches. But it's the engineering, the precision involved, which can make those collection of individual parts come together to keep time to within, plus or minus 2 seconds per calendar day. It's remarkable, and I think that's part of the enjoyment, and it's obviously the part of why the damn things are so expensive as well.
So, I think we got most of the items covered. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the footwear, so I've talked about utility there, but aside from the wellies, which are de rigueur in the British wintertime rather, for me, when I'm looking to be a little bit more put together, I like a good chunky brogue. I mean, that is classic country wear, and for me, when you're talking about chunky brogue, there can't be anything else other than Trickers. It's good enough for the king, royal warrant holders, and I've been fortunate enough to have a tour of the Trickers factory within the last sort of few months, and I was just overwhelmed by the love in which those folks there put into the making of those boots. And you go on their refurbishment floor when you're touring the factory, and you see boots which are being resold, and they're 30 and 40 years old. And you're buying into a product which will likely, when you're buying, and I'm 54, if I've bought a new pair of Trickers, they might see me out. So it gives you that sort of sense of connection with what you're wearing.
So were these old Trickers boots, were they different? Sometimes, vintage shoes have maybe finer stitching. Could you tell there was anything different, or was it the exact same style?
They look pretty much the same, to be honest. I mean, when you're looking at them, Trickers are Trickers. I mean, they've got their profile, which they are very known for.
Very country look. It's like the opposite of Graziano and Girling, which are like fine and refined. Like Trickers is the triple sole, right?
It's the Ferrari and the Land Rover that you're talking about there, isn't it? With G&G, they're kind of the Ferrari of the shoe world. It's all sleek lines and beauty and colour. But the Tricker, and I've made the joke in the past, I always think of my Trickers when the zombie apocalypse actually arrives. If I've got to reach for one pair of boots that I know I'm going to survive with on the land, it's my Trickers with a commando sole, because I know I can stamp my way through anything in those.
Do they have like steel toe caps or anything like that?
I don't know. Maybe they'll do a special order for you, but because of course they do a bespoke actually as well. But no, I don't think
really
so.
Bespoke Trickers.
They've got a bespoke program which was very impressive, I have to say, visiting the factory.
Is it shoes or boots or both?
Both, yeah. And they train their own master shoemakers there, and they're pretty impressive.
What's the price point?
Don't quote me on it, but I think it was in the region of 3,000 plus, which actually, when taken against some of the the London-based bespoke shoemakers, it's a fairly good entry point into the bespoke world.
Is it Goodyear machine welted like their regular line shoes, or is it actually hand welted like most of the English bespoke shoes?
I think it's a combination of both, depending on what the product you're looking at is all around. But it was a very impressive process to see them. They're even sort of creating their own twine that they do the stitching with. It's all waxed in-house.
It sounds like a hand-welted shoe.
Yeah, they've got their own sort of recipe for the wax, which they make up in the factory. It's something quite special. It made me appreciate footwear on an entirely different level. Because when you see it in the shop, you cannot see that army of generations of knowledge behind it, which has created that product. And when it comes into your safekeeping, as I say, I like the idea of passing it on, because when I'm done with it, I like to think, even if it's not a family member, it'll enter the supply chain again, and somebody else will get the pleasure of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I have a pair of Trickers. It's a kind of cognac English tan colored leather, full brogue, and you can tell even the broguing is slightly larger than maybe in a city shoe. And then triple leather sole. Mine are leather soled. Do you go for leather or do you go for utility like rubber?
Yeah, I mean, by and large, I would opt for day night as a choice because, wet country, you need that extra bit of traction and insulation.
So you say day night though, like my experience with day night is they're quite heavy, and Vibram also has excellent products, but you like day night.
I like day night because I think it's that middle ground, I mean, I've got a pair of Trickers with a commando sole, which is very chunky, but the day night offers that sort of middle ground where it's still sleek enough in profile to be a city shoe, but you've got that traction, that sturdiness of grip, which I think is necessary in the UK when you're walking on pavements with ice, with wet. I think it's got you covered. Leather, the problem with that, you're likely to find yourself on your backside when you're rushing down the street.
Interesting. So have you tried like Vibram soles at all?
I think I've been through everything over the years. I mean, in my country life, I definitely prefer the commando sole. And in city life, I'm wearing a pair of day-night shoes now because I know I'm going to walk miles and miles around the streets of London. And that, for me, gives me that confidence to take on the elements because, even in September here, it's dry one minute, it's wet the next.
Now, shoe care is definitely something that most men interested in classic footwear do. But when you're in a country and you're the commando sole and you're out in the field, I mean, you get dirty. So what's your shoe cleaning routine?
Well, I'm lucky. My wife is an equestrian, so we've got a tack room full of all leather, and I've long come to realise that the old saddle soap is not just good for saddles. So when the old shoes and boots have had a really tough time out in the fields, saddle soap is the starting point for me to get it all off, cleans off all the mud.
Do you use a brush? Do you use a cloth?
I use a brush, yeah, simple brush. I never treat my shoes as if they're a princess. They really, get the full service. And I do like a good conditioning cream. So much as I hate to say it, Saphir, the French brand, does seem to make one of the better sort of shoe product lines for me. And I do like their Renovator. It does do what it's meant to. Keeps the shoes nourished and well conditioned, and it works, pretty well for me. I first got into the brand Saphir. I was at is it Boughton House, the Dunhill house in town, and I was actually there I was having a massage in the my wife had bought me a birthday present of having a back massage in Boughton House, and we had
Did you like it?
It was pretty good, yeah. And whilst I was waiting for my massage, I was chatting. They had a chap come in, and his job, Scottish fellow, professional shoe cleaner, his job was to clean all of the shoes that they had on display in Dunhill. He came in once a week and brought all of the shoes up to a mirror shine. So I walked over to have a chat to him. Being an ex-military guy, I like my mirror shines. So I said, "Crikey, mate, you've damn good job on those. What's the stuff you're using?" And he said, this, I wouldn't use anything else other than this Saphir stuff.
Well, what year was that?
It was a good few years ago, before Saphir became anywhere like its level of popularity today. It was a real arduous task to track it down. It wasn't readily available.
Yeah.
And I have found them to be pretty good.
They're a good brand, but I think today there's also more brands out there. There's other French brands like Famaco. There is, Japanese Boot Black. There's like Swedish Paul Brungard.
I've stuck with what I knew.
Yeah,
so
yeah. That's
I'm sure. The thing is, when they were the sort of trendsetter, weren't they? And when people started thinking more about the product, and of course they're quite natural in nature, aren't they? So they don't have that awful petroleum smell when you apply it. And it tells you something about the product when you're putting it on. If it's unpalatable in odor, is it the best thing to put on your footwear? Whereas those smells are quite pleasing, and it makes me have a bit more confidence in the, what you're using. But definitely, they've opened the door to many other brands coming in, and I'm stuck with where I landed originally. I'm sure there are better ones there now.
Oh, and if it works for you, right? I think sometimes people have that connotation that they only need the best of something, right? And sometimes it's fine if it's of good quality, if it's nice. I don't need to have the best meal or the best suit or the best pair of shoes, but it's sometimes enough for it to be, good and happy and doing the job that you bought it for. With that being said, shall we have a little look around Walker Slater to see what their offering has? Because have you used the brand before?
I haven't. I mean, I'm familiar with them because clearly their country style is in my horizon. But yeah, it's a beautiful shop.
If you're in the market for refined pieces to fulfill your own English countryside wardrobe fantasies, tweed specialist Walker Slater is a great place to shop. Our thanks go to them for hosting us, and to Ash for the wonderful conversation.